After the Civil War, a whole new system popped up in the South. It was called sharecropping, and on the surface, it promised a fresh start. But the reality? Well, that was a lot more complicated. So today, we're going to dig into how this system grew out of the ashes of post-war Georgia, and you'll see just how long its shadow really is. To really get sharecropping, you have to understand the world it was born into. And for Georgia, the end of the war wasn't some sigh of relief. No, it was the beginning of an absolutely devastating crisis. The state was completely and totally shattered. I mean, everything that made the economy tick had been destroyed, leaving this massive, gaping hole. Something new had to fill that void, and that, right there, is where our story really kicks off. And the scale of this destruction was just immense. We're not just talking about battlefields. Sherman's march was systematic. It was designed to dismantle the state's entire economic machine. Warehouses, factories, railroads, even basic tools like plows, all gone. On top of that, the banks failed, so there was literally no money to rebuild. Georgia was at a standstill.
So what do you do when your whole world has been turned to ash? You grab onto the one thing you know. And for Georgia's farmers, that one thing was cotton. So facing total ruin, they decided to double down, betting the farm, literally, on this one single cash crop, hoping that high prices would be their salvation. It was a huge, huge gamble.
And you know, this whole decision just flew in the face of what all the experts were saying at the time. They were advising farmers, hey, diversify your crops, be more efficient, don't put all your eggs in one basket. But that lure of a cotton boom was just too strong to resist. They ignored the warnings and bet everything. And the gamble? It failed. Big time. A perfect storm of bad weather, worn-out soil, and wild price swings meant they had one bad harvest after another. So instead of rebuilding, the obsession with cotton just dragged the state's farms into an even deeper, longer-lasting depression.
This created a really fascinating split. You could call it a tale of two Georgias. In the cities, like Atlanta, things were booming. They rebuilt the railroads, new businesses were popping up, people were moving in. But you step outside the city limits, into the countryside, a totally different story. It was all struggle, failure, and just plain hardship.
So it's in this struggling, cash-starved countryside that a new system had to be invented. You had landowners with tons of land, but zero cash to pay workers. And then you had this huge workforce, newly freed African Americans and poor white farmers, who had their labor, but no land, no money, no nothing. Sharecropping looked like the perfect answer.
In theory, the arrangement was pretty straightforward. The landowner, who's short on cash, provides the land, the seeds, the tools, basically everything you need to start a farm. In return, the laborer, the sharecropper, works the land for a whole season. Come harvest time, they split the crop. Seems fair, right? On paper, it looks like a win-win.
Now, it's important to know there was a difference between a sharecropper and what was called a tenant farmer. Tenant farmers had a little more going for them. They usually owned their own tools, maybe a mule, which meant they got to keep a bigger piece of the pie. Sharecroppers, on the other hand, brought nothing but their own two hands. But here's the kicker. Despite that difference, they almost always ended up in the exact same boat, stuck in debt to the landowner.
And this is where that nice, neat theory just completely falls apart in the real world. The system very quickly went from being a practical arrangement to being a trap. It wasn't about mutual benefit anymore, it was all about economic control. So you have to ask yourself, right? Was this ever really about a fair exchange of labor for land, or was something else going on from the very beginning?
It didn't take long for the system to change. It stopped being just a response to a lack of cash, and it became a tool. Landowners figured out they could use debt to create a permanent, cheap labor force. If your workers are always in debt to you, they can never leave. They can't save up to buy their own land. They're stuck.
And this cycle was just brutal, and it trapped families for generations. Here's how it worked. You start the year by getting all your supplies, food, seeds, tools, on credit from the landowner's own store, usually at crazy high prices. Then you work your tail off for a whole year. You harvest the crop, and you give the landowner his huge share. Then comes the moment of truth, settling up. You go to the store to pay your debt, and you find out that after the high interest is calculated, you've made nothing. Or even worse, you owe more than you started with. So what's your only option? Sign up for another year and hope for the best. It was a treadmill of debt you could never get off of. This system seemed unbreakable. It dominated life in the South for decades. But, nothing lasts forever. A few massive historical forces started chipping away at it, slowly but surely, until the whole thing just faded away.
It was kind of a 1-2-3 punch that finally did it in. First, an insect called the boll weevil showed up and just wiped out the cotton crops. It destroyed the very foundation the system was built on. Second, you had the Great Migration, where millions of African Americans headed north for factory jobs, which drained the labor pool. And the final nail in the coffin? Technology. New tractors and machines just made a massive, indebted human workforce obsolete.
So the system disappeared. End of story, right? Well, not quite. Take a look at this number. 2,607. Just let that number hang there for a second. What in the world could that mean?
That was the number of people in Georgia who were still officially classified as tenant farmers as recently as 1997. Let that sink in. 1997 is just a shocking reminder that a system we think of as belonging to the 1800s stretched all the way to the edge of the 21st century.
And that really leaves us with one last big question to think about. When an entire economy is built on a system of control and debt for that long, its legacy doesn't just vanish overnight. It echoes through the generations, shaping families, communities, and the very fabric of a society in ways we're still grappling with today.